Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine, if you will, that you're standing in the grand ballroom of, this elite Southampton gala.
Oh, setting the scene. I like it.
Right. It's the absolute peak of the summer season. And the room is just a sea of staggering wealth.
The kind of wealth most people can't even fathom.
Exactly. Now, to your left, there's this woman, and she
Oh.
is working the room frantically. She is draped head to toe in, the latest, highly recognizable season of Gucci.
Let me guess, logos everywhere.
Logos everywhere. Her diamonds are catching literally every single glint of the chandelier light. She's handing out these thick, embossed business cards, taking carefully angled selfies, and basically making sure everyone within a 10-foot radius knows exactly how successful her latest tech venture has been.
Yeah, it's a performance. We see it constantly in those circles. And honestly, it is entirely driven by anxiety.
Yes, that is the perfect word for it. It's an anxious performance. But then, if you look across the room, there is another woman, and she is the complete antithesis of the first one.
Right, the person you almost miss if you aren't paying attention.
Exactly. She's wearing a beautifully tailored dress, but there's absolutely no visible label. And her handbag. I mean, it might be a vintage piece she found in her grandmother's attic, or it might be a custom $15,000 USD creation from a bespoke Italian artisan. You honestly couldn't tell unless you could physically run your hands over the leather.
Which is entirely the point.
Right. And she speaks to maybe, 3 people the entire evening? She doesn't hand out a single card. And yet she leaves the party with a billionaire business partner, while the woman in Gucci leaves with nothing but a stack of superficial contacts.
That contrast right there perfectly illustrates the central thesis of the dynamic we are analyzing today. Because the person who holds the ultimate power in that room isn't the one shouting about their success or projecting their net worth onto their sleeves.
No, not at all.
It's the person you barely even noticed. The one who leaves absolutely no digital footprint, whose assets are completely invisible to the public record, and whose clothing whispers rather than screams.
So welcome to today's deep dive, and welcome to the Wealthnetic community. We are exploring this fascinating and honestly somewhat unnerving shift in how success operates today. We are calling it the era of invisibility.
It's a great name for it.
Thanks. Because as we navigate the year 2026, looking rich is actually the most dangerous thing a person can do. So we are going to deconstruct the mechanics of stealth wealth from 3 interconnected angles, right? How to wear it socially, how to legally protect it financially, and how to systemically sustain it economically.
And to understand why this shift to invisibility is happening right now, we really have to look at the macroeconomic and digital landscape. I mean, we are living in an age of unprecedented data breaches, deep economic fragility, and just hypervisibility.
Yeah, everyone is chronically online.
Exactly. Every aspect of a person's life is seemingly on display, ready to be monetized or worse, weaponized by someone else. Because of that structural vulnerability, blending in has become the ultimate luxury. It is your strongest shield. We have fundamentally moved from an era of conspicuous consumption to an era of strategic, systemic invisibility.
So if you're listening to this and wondering why your expensive designer jacket or your flashy new car isn't getting you the respect or the security you thought it would, well, this is exactly why. And to break this down, we're pulling insights from a really incredible stack of materials today.
We've got a lot of ground to cover.
We do. We're looking at high-end lifestyle reporting that decodes the social cues of the modern elite. We're tearing into some heavy masterclass level legal strategies on asset protection and public record privacy. And we are integrating a groundbreaking text on regenerative economics titled Pathways to Regeneration, which completely redefines how communities design invisible, resilient wealth systems.
It's a profound evolution. It really is. Wealth used to be about standing out. Now, survival and power are about disappearing seamlessly into the background.
Okay, let's start by decoding that social camouflage. The literature refers to this as the whisper wealth movement, and the driving force behind this movement is basically the democratization of luxury.
Right, the idea that luxury is no longer exclusive.
Exactly. In 2026, almost anyone can finance a designer belt on a payment app or, put a flashy logo-covered bag on a high-interest credit card. The aspirational buyer and the actual billionaire can both wear the exact same recognizable item. And when that happens, the item loses all its power as a status signal. It becomes diluted.
It's basic signaling theory. When a signal becomes too cheap or too easy to produce or acquire, the truly elite abandon it. They create a new signal that is significantly harder to fake. So elite status no longer relies on visible, recognizable logos. It is retreated into a layered system of invisible codes.
And you need the key to read them, right?
Exactly. It requires specialized knowledge to decode. If you don't possess the code, you just see a plain beige sweater. But if you know the code, you see immense power.
And the research breaks this down into 5 specific layers of social camouflage. Let's start with layer 1, which is the material codes. It's no longer about brand recognition. It's entirely about quality recognition. It's the tactile reality of the garment. They call it the hand feel.
The shift here is an absolute rejection of synthetics. I mean, if you see polyester, nylon, or acrylic in a garment, that immediately signals a lack of true wealth.
Wait, really? Even in high-end stuff?
Even then. And it's not just because synthetic materials are uncomfortable or ecologically damaging. It's because they lack the aura of a true long-term investment. The new material code is based entirely on premium natural fibers that are inherently difficult to source. We are talking about materials like vicuña.
Oh man, I was reading about vicuña for this deep dive, and the mechanics of sourcing it are wild.
It's incredibly strict.
Right. It's essentially this wild camelid from the high Andes, and you can only humanely shear them every 2 or 3 years. You physically cannot mass produce it. So a coat made of vicuña might look like a simple, boring brown overcoat, but it costs $30,000 USD simply because the material itself is an exercise in extreme scarcity.
That is the core mechanism of the material code. You cannot fake scarcity. Brands operate on this premise now. The garments are chosen for their inherent durability and how beautifully the natural fibers age over time, not for a logo printed on the chest.
Which brings us to layer 2, and I think this is where the psychology gets really interesting, behavioral codes. The literature highlights this massive gulf between how the newly wealthy behave and how generational wealth behaves, specifically around the concept of vagueness.
Yes, vagueness is a huge indicator. When you encounter someone who is newly wealthy and ask them what they do, their instinct is to give you an oral resume.
Oh, I've met that guy.
Right. They will actively volunteer information about their investment returns, their recent acquisitions, or the scale of their business success. They're providing context because they feel a deep psychological need to prove that they belong in the room.
It's an evolutionary response, really. They're signaling their value to the tribe so they don't get cast out. But the truly secure, the old money, they do the exact opposite. They deflect. If you ask them what they do, they use these incredibly bland phrases like, I keep busy with various things, or I manage some family investments.
The vagueness itself is the power play. By refusing to explain their success, they are operating on the assumption that you already know they belong. Explaining implies that you require the listener's validation. Generational wealth refuses to ask for validation.
That's a huge mindset shift.
It is. And if the listener pushes for details, they say, oh, what kind of investments? It doesn't expose the wealthy person. It exposes the listener as an outsider who doesn't understand the unspoken rules of the room.
It's a fascinating social trap. The newly wealthy person thinks they're building a connection by oversharing their success, but they're actually just triggering the alarm system of the elite, which leads perfectly into layer 3, temporal codes. This is all about an individual's relationship with time, patina over pristine.
Exactly. New money naturally optimizes for current, visible quality. They want the pristine, brand new, fresh out of the box item because it proves they have the liquid capital right now. But old money optimizes for demonstrated continuity. They want to show that the wealth has been there for generations.
I love the example used in the research regarding watches, because if someone walks into a boardroom wearing a brand new, massive, diamond-encrusted watch, it screams, I just had a liquidity event.
Exactly. I just got rich.
But if someone walks in wearing a vintage 1960s Patek Philippe on a slightly worn leather strap,
that communicates a completely different timeline. It suggests inheritance. It suggests a family history of curation and collecting. It shows a relationship with time that a new purchase simply cannot replicate no matter how much USD you throw at it.
You can't buy age.
You really can't. And you see this temporal coding in furniture, in art, and even in the condition of their cars. An appropriately worn-in piece of high-quality craftsmanship signals a comfort with wealth that pristine newness actually contradicts.
And then we move from time to physical space. Layer 4, spatial codes. This is the idea that access matters infinitely more than ownership.
Because at a certain echelon of wealth, everyone can afford the exact same possessions. If everyone in your social circle can afford the private jet or the yacht stops being a differentiator.
It's just a standard commute at that point.
Right. What differentiates you is access to the specific rooms where deal flow happens, where policy is quietly discussed before it ever goes public.
The research used a very specific real estate example for this, a Gin Lane address in Southampton. Now, an aggressive tech entrepreneur could easily take their money and build a much larger, technologically superior, far more expensive mega mansion in a new, flashy development somewhere else. But they desperately want the older, smaller house on Gin Lane. Why?
Because the Gin Lane address implies social acceptance by the existing entrenched residents. Often, getting into those specific historical neighborhoods or co-op buildings requires navigating incredibly complex social barriers, board approvals, and quiet background checks.
Right, you can't just throw money at the board.
Exactly. You cannot just buy that social meaning with a fiat bank account. The address proves you navigated the invisible social maze.
So we have material scarcity, behavioral vagueness, temporal patina, and spatial access. But layer 5 is where this gets highly technical and hypermodern. Digital codes. In 2026, the ultimate flex is being digitally invisible.
Oh, absolutely. We are seeing a massive inverse correlation between net worth and online presence. The wealthiest and most powerful individuals are increasingly maintaining absolutely zero public social media profiles.
And it's not just about abstaining from posting. The sources dive into this booming shadow industry of digital suppression and reputation management. We're talking about firms in London and Colorado that charge astronomical retainers to scrub their clients from the internet entirely. Can we dig into the mechanics of how they actually do that? Because, you can't just call Google and ask them to delete you.
Right. No, it is a highly aggressive, multi-pronged approach.
Yeah.
These firms use AI-driven monitoring to map every single mention of their client. When they find damaging, outdated, or even just revealing content, like a photo of their house or a list of their philanthropic donations, they use a variety of tools to get rid of it.
Like what?
Sometimes it's algorithmic burying, where they flood the search results with positive but incredibly boring generic content to push the real information to page 10 of the search results, which, as we know, is essentially the graveyard of the internet.
I was reading about one tactic where these reputation firms will actually buy the copyright to an unflattering photo from a photographer, and once they own the copyright, they issue a massive wave of DMCA takedown notices to every website hosting the image, legally compelling them to remove it. They're literally using copyright law as a weapon for privacy.
That is a perfect example of the lengths people are going to in order to vanish. They're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to ensure that when you search their name, you find absolutely nothing of substance.
And that reality that visibility is now viewed as a critical vulnerability is the perfect bridge to our next major area. Because social camouflage might keep you safe from the social climbers and grifters at a cocktail party. But the reality of 2026 is that the most dangerous predators aren't standing next to you at the gala. They are sitting in a law office halfway across the country, mining data breaches.
Which is terrifying, but true.
So how does a beautifully tailored, unbranded jacket protect you from a contingency fee lawyer?
It doesn't protect you at all, which is why we have to move from social camouflage to legal camouflage.
Let's unpack the mechanics of public record privacy. Security through obscurity. Because the legal and financial sources we reviewed make one point crystal clear. In the modern era, visibility invites litigation. Period.
We have to contextualize the threat environment here. The literature points out a massive systemic issue, the continuous wave of data breaches. At the end of last year, we saw a single breach involving 1.5 billion records.
Billion with a B, that's insane.
Right. Your personal information, your home address, your financial breadcrumbs, the names of your family members, they're circulating on the dark web and in highly accessible data aggregators right now.
And plaintiff attorneys know exactly how to leverage this. The research blew my mind on this point. I always assumed a lawsuit happens sequentially, Someone slips on your property, they get hurt, they hire a lawyer, and the lawyer sues you. But these sophisticated contingency fee lawyers operate in reverse.
They do. They don't wait for an accident to happen and then blindly send a demand letter. They start with the name of the potential defendant, and they run a comprehensive asset search. They look at recorded county deeds, they scrape Secretary of State filings, they pull property tax records, and they buy reports from data brokers like LexisNexis.
They're essentially doing an ROI calculation on suing you.
Precisely. They are asking, are you worth the time and capital it takes to sue? If they search your name and see 3 rental properties, a primary residence with equity, and a brokerage account, they don't see a person. They see a payout.
Right.
They see a highly lucrative target,
Yeah.
and they will aggressively pursue the case, knowing you have the assets that actually settle.
So most listeners in the Wealthnetic community are smart enough to know that doing business in their own name is a bad idea. The common wisdom is, okay, I'll just set up an LLC for my real estate or my investments. That creates a corporate veil. I'm protected. But the legal masterclass we reviewed explicitly calls this out as a massive vulnerability. They refer to it as the brochure effect. Let's break down why a basic DIY LLC fails.
The brochure effect is a brilliant way to visualize the failure of basic entity structuring. Let's say you take the standard route. You go online, pay $100, and set up a limited liability company in your home state, but you use your actual home address as the registered business address. Or you name the entity something easily identifiable, like the Mathis Family Property Group, LLC.
Or you list yourself as the primary registered agent on the state's public website.
Exactly. What you have done is completely unravel your own privacy. A simple automated name search by a hungry plaintiff's lawyer instantly maps everything right back to you. They pull up your personal profile, they see the LLC, and they see every property titled in that LLC's name. You haven't hidden your wealth. You have literally handed the lawyer a highly organized, indexed brochure of all your assets.
You are paying the state a filing fee to do the lawyer's opposition research for them. That's just crazy to me.
It happens every day.
Now, we know the DIY single state LLC is a trap. Let's get into the deep mechanics of what sophisticated investors actually do. The research outlines a very specific layered 2-entity solution. How do we disassociate a person's identity from the public record of a property?
It requires separating the concept of title ownership from beneficial ownership. The first entity in this stack is a land trust. A land trust is a very specific type of revocable grantor trust used strictly as a title-holding vehicle. When you purchase a property, you do not put the deed in your personal name, and you do not put it in your LLC's name. You direct the title company to record the deed in the name of the land trust.
And you give the trust an incredibly boring name, right? Something that tells the public absolutely nothing.
You use the property address, the 123 Main Street Trust. So when that plaintiff's lawyer searches the county tax assessor's database, all they see is that the property is owned by the 123 Main Street Trust. Your personal name is entirely absent from the public county record.
Okay, I want to pause here and really dig into the weeds because a lot of people get tripped up on the financing and insurance side of this. If I transfer a property I already own into an LLC, my mortgage lender might freak out and trigger a due on sale clause, right? Because the LLC is a separate legal person. But a land trust operates differently under the law.
That is a critical distinction. Under federal law, specifically the Garn-St. Germain Depository Institutions Act of 1982, you are legally permitted to transfer the title of your property into a revocable grantor trust, which a land trust is, without triggering the due on sale clause from your lender, provided you remain the beneficiary, of course.
Oh, that's huge.
Right. The mortgage stays in your personal name, but the public title shifts to the privacy of the trust.
So the deed is hidden, but a trust is just a contract. It doesn't offer liability protection. If someone gets hurt at 123 Main Street, they sue the trust. And if I am the beneficiary of that trust, the liability flows right through the trust and it attaches to me personally.
Correct. The land trust gives you privacy, but zero asset protection. This is why it is only the first half of the two-entity solution. You need a liability buffer. Therefore, you do not make yourself the beneficiary of the land trust. You make an anonymous holding company the beneficiary.
And this is where we bring in the Wyoming LLC.
Typically, yes, a state like Wyoming, Nevada, or Delaware. Let's use Wyoming as the example because it has some of the strongest privacy and asset protection statutes in the country. Wyoming does not require the state to publish the names of the LLC managers or members on their public searchable online database.
Let me synthesize this because the architecture here is just beautiful. The physical property title is held by the 123 Main Street Trust. The beneficiary receiving all the income from that trust is, say, Blue Sky Holdings LLC, based in Wyoming. And the state of Wyoming legally refuses to tell the public who owns Blue Sky Holdings.
The trail goes completely cold. The contingency fee lawyer searches your name and finds absolutely nothing. They search the property address, find a trust, trace it to a Wyoming LLC, and hit a solid brick wall. You appear penniless in the public record.
Now, I know what some listeners are thinking. When we talk about offshore-style privacy, hiding ownerships, and anonymous LLCs, it sounds like we are setting up a tax evasion scheme. It sounds like something out of a Hollywood movie involving briefcases of cash.
We need to be unequivocally clear here, and the legal texts emphasize this heavily. This architecture is not about dodging taxes or hiding money from the IRS. It is 100% legal, plain vanilla compliance.
So you still pay taxes on it?
Absolutely. LLCs and revocable grantor trusts have decades of established case law behind them. The state courts and the federal government know exactly how to treat them. You are still reporting all of the income on your personal tax return. You are paying every cent you owe. You are simply utilizing your legal right to privacy to keep your assets off of easily scraped public databases.
Security through obscurity. You aren't hiding from the government, you are hiding from the predatory legal industry. And that distinction between legal privacy and illegal tax evasion is exactly why the sources warn people away from these viral TikTok scams. There's one mentioned in the text called the Vortex Trust. I see these all the time on social media.
Yes. The Vortex Trust, or the Spendthrift Trust scam, is a massive liability masquerading as asset protection. Promoters on social media will tell you to stack multiple complex trusts together, run circular fee schedules between them, and they will claim that by doing so, the income somehow legally ceases to be taxable income. They promise you will never pay capital gains or income tax again.
Which is, what, the fastest way to get audited and potentially face criminal charges?
Without a doubt. If a strategy claims it can magically evaporate your tax liability through paperwork alchemy, it is a fraud. The IRS has entire task forces dedicated to dismantling these abusive trust arrangements. Real, durable asset protection for 2026 relies on proven statutory law, clean titling, and rigorous operational discipline.
Discipline is the key word there. You cannot just pay a lawyer to set up this Wyoming land trust structure and then treat it like a personal piggy bank. The legal doctrine is called piercing the corporate veil, right?
Exactly. If a judge sees that you are using the Wyoming LLC's business bank account to pay for your personal groceries or your kids' tuition, they will rule that the LLC is merely an alter ego. They will disregard the protection entirely, and your personal assets will be exposed.
You have to respect the substance over the form. Separate bank accounts, separate accounting, annual minutes. Now, I want to get back into the mechanics of the Wyoming LLC itself. Say the lawyer somehow figures out you own the LLC and they get a judgment against you personally. How does the Wyoming LLC actually protect the assets inside it? I was reading about a legal mechanism called a charging order, but specifically, the sources highlight the danger of single-member LLCs versus multi-member LLCs. Can we unpack how a charging order actually works?
A charging order is a legally mandated loan. If a creditor wins a lawsuit against you personally, they cannot simply seize the real estate or the cash held inside your Wyoming LLC. The law prevents them from liquidating the company's assets. Their sole remedy is to apply to the court for a charging order, which states that if the LLC ever distributes profit to the owner, unit money must be intercepted and paid to the creditor instead.
So they get a piece of paper that essentially says, we get next.
Exactly. But here is the brilliant defensive nature of this mechanism. You are still the manager of the LLC. You retain complete control over when or if distributions are made. You can simply decide that the LLC needs to retain all its earnings for future expansion. You don't distribute a single dollar.
The money stays inside the protective bubble of the LLC. The creditor is sitting out in the cold, holding a charging order, getting absolutely nothing. But wait, it gets worse for the creditor, right? The text mentions a poison pill involving K-1 tax forms. I read this and it sounded almost too good to be true. If the LLC makes a profit, but I don't distribute the cash, the creditor who holds the charging order might still have to pay the taxes on that profit.
That is the concept of phantom income, supported by mechanisms like Revenue Ruling 77-137. Because the LLC is a pass-through tax entity, whoever holds the economic rights in this case, the creditor with the charging order is often assigned the tax liability for their share of the LLC's profits, even if they never received a dime of actual cash. You issue them a K-1 tax form at the end of the year.
Wow. That is utterly ruthless. You are starving the creditor of cash while simultaneously burying them in tax liabilities.
It radically alters the leverage dynamic of a lawsuit. When a plaintiff's attorney realizes they are facing a multi-member Wyoming LLC protected by a charging order, they know they are facing years of litigation with no guaranteed payout and potential tax headaches. In almost every scenario, they capitulate and settle the lawsuit for pennies on the dollar, or they drop the case entirely. However, you mentioned single-member LLCs.
Right. Why are single-member LLCs dangerous?
Because in many states, courts have ruled that if there is only one member of the LLC, there are no other partners to protect. The underlying logic of a charging order is to prevent a creditor from forcing their way into a partnership and disrupting the business for the innocent partners. If you are the only member, some judges will simply pierce the veil, bypass the charging order limitation, and allow the creditor to liquidate the assets.
Oh, I see. So you're basically exposed.
Yes. This is why sophisticated structures often involve creating a multi-member dynamic, perhaps by assigning a 5% interest to an irrevocable trust or a family-limited partnership.
It's a game of architectural defense. Now, what about a person's actual primary residence? Because a lot of listeners have significant equity tied up in the home they sleep in every night. You obviously can't put your primary residence into a Wyoming business LLC because you aren't running a business out of your living room.
Right, and you should never put personal use assets into a business entity. It is a massive red flag for a judge, and it immediately invites veil piercing. Furthermore, if you put your home in an LLC, you lose your capital gains tax exemptions and your homestead protections. For a primary residence, the correct tool is a personal residence trust, or PRT.
Okay, so how does a PRT balance privacy with tax compliance?
A PRT is a very specifically drafted revocable trust. Under the IRS grantor trust rules, because you retain the right to revoke the trust and live in the property, the IRS views you as the owner for tax purposes. You keep all your mortgage interest deductions, and you keep your $500,000 USD capital gains exemption if you are married and sell the house.
So the IRS treats it as mine.
But the county recorder's office treats the trust as the owner. You appoint a nominee trustee, perhaps an attorney, or even your Wyoming LLC to hold the title. Your personal name is stripped entirely off the public deed, but your tax benefits remain perfectly intact.
Okay, we've covered real estate and business assets. But what about liquid cash, brokerage accounts, high-yield savings? If a creditor gets a judgment against me, can't they just freeze my bank account?
This brings us to a different vector of attack. We have to shift from talking about public record privacy to Social Security number protection. When a creditor gets a judgment, they don't manually search for your bank. They send a mass electronic garnishment order to all the major financial institutions, and that order is keyed directly to your personal Social Security number.
So the bank's computer system runs a sweep, and if it finds an account tied to my SSN, it freezes the funds instantly.
Instantly. The solution here is to utilize a privacy banking trust. You set up a trust, and you obtain a unique employer identification number, or EIN, from the IRS, specifically for that trust. You then open the bank account under the name of the trust, using the EIN instead of your SSN.
I think of it like changing the locks on a house. The creditor shows up with a legal key that is specifically cut to fit a social security number lock, but when they try to put it in the door of my bank account, the lock only accepts an EIN. The key just doesn't turn. The computer system reports back, no match found, and the garnishment fails.
That is a highly accurate analogy, and you maintain complete control over the trust and the funds. Now, I want to address a major regulatory shift that the sources highlight, because it makes this entire architecture more critical and more complex than ever before. In 2026, we are fully dealing with the FinCEN disclosure regulations under the Corporate Transparency Act.
Yes, the Corporate Transparency Act. I read this and thought, wait a minute. If the federal government is forcing everyone to disclose the beneficial owners of their LLCs, doesn't that completely destroy the Wyoming privacy strategy? How do we reconcile this?
It requires understanding the difference between federal databases and state databases. The CTA requires you to report the beneficial ownership of your LLC to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which is a branch of the U.S. Treasury. You are legally required to tell the federal government who you are. However, the FinCEN database is highly secure, and crucially, it is not accessible to the general public or to plaintiffs' attorneys.
So the federal government knows I own the Wyoming LLC.
Yes, but the contingency fee lawyer sitting in Chicago trying to figure out if they should sue you cannot log into FinCEN. They're relying on state-level Secretary of State websites and county public records. Wyoming continues to protect your privacy at the state public-facing level. You comply with the federal law, but you remain invisible to the predatory legal industry.
It is a brilliant tightrope walk. So we have established the social camouflage avoiding the attention of grifters through Whisper Wealth. We have established the legal camouflage avoiding the attention of lawyers through trust and LLC architecture. But let's pan out. Let's look at the absolute highest level of risk, macroeconomic risk. Because hiding your wealth in a bank account doesn't help you if the fiat currency in that bank account collapses in value or if the centralized grid fails.
This is where we transition from individual defense to systemic community resilience. Because true wealth isn't just a number on a screen. True wealth is your ability to withstand macroeconomic shocks, supply chain disruptions, and centralized failures.
And the foundational source for this section is the book Pathways to Regeneration. It's a dense, brilliant text that relies heavily on the philosophy of a really famous 20th century systems thinker and architect.
Right. He popularized the concept of comprehensive anticipatory design science. The premise is that humanity spends entirely too much energy reacting to crises, waiting for ecological collapse or banking failures, and then scrambling to fix the damage. He argued we need to anticipate these negative trajectories and proactively design alternative systems that are holistic and resource efficient.
He used this incredible mechanical metaphor about being a trim tab. For listeners who aren't familiar with naval architecture, what exactly is a trim tab and how does it relate to personal economics?
If you look at a massive ocean liner, the ship is steered by a giant main rudder. But when the ship is moving, the hydrodynamic pressure of the ocean against that giant rudder is immense. You cannot simply use brute force to turn it. So engineers attach a tiny secondary rudder to the trailing edge of the main rudder. That is the trim tab.
It's a rudder on a rudder?
Exactly. When the captain turns the wheel, it doesn't move the big rudder. It moves the tiny trim tab. The trim tab swings out, creates a localized low-pressure zone in the water, and that pressure differential effortlessly pulls the giant rudder around, which in turn redirects the entire massive ship. The author used this physics principle to illustrate that tiny, smartly designed systemic interventions at the edge of a system can change the course of massive societal trajectories.
You don't have to fight the whole system. You just have to apply leverage in the right spot. And one of the massive societal trajectories the Pathways book tackles is our dangerous reliance on a fundamentally flawed economic model. Specifically, they critique the global reliance on GDP, gross domestic product, as the ultimate measure of a nation's success. Why is GDP such a dangerous metric?
Because GDP is entirely indiscriminate. It is a blind calculation of the velocity of money. If a community builds a state-of-the-art hospital, GDP goes up. But if that same community builds a massive bomb, or if they suffer a catastrophic oil spill and have to spend billions of dollars on environmental cleanup, GDP also goes up. It measures activity, not health. It completely ignored the depletion of natural resources, the fragility of supply chains, or the social costs of wealth inequality.
It's like measuring a person's health by how fast their heart is beating. A high heart rate could mean they are an elite athlete, or it could mean they're having a massive panic attack. GDP can't tell the difference. So, if fiat currency and GDP are flawed metrics, how do we design better invisible worth systems? The book introduces this concept called the leaky bucket framework to explain why local economies constantly struggle.
Imagine your local town's economy as a bucket. Wealth flows into this bucket through various channels, local wages, tourism dollars, perhaps some local exports. But that bucket is riddled with holes. Wealth is constantly hemorrhaging out of the community.
How does the wealth leak out?
It leaks out when residents buy their groceries from massive, non-local corporate chains instead of local farmers. It leaks out when corporate profits are extracted and sent to distant shareholders. Most significantly, it leaks out through debt service, when massive amounts of local capital are sent to centralized megabanks in the form of interest payments. The community is constantly working, but the wealth never stays.
So the anticipatory design solution is to plug the holes in the bucket. It's like setting up a local solar microgrid for your neighborhood instead of relying solely on a fragile national power grid. You are keeping the financial energy circulating locally.
And the way you plug those holes is by fundamentally redefining what capital is. Conventional centralized economics only recognizes financial capital, fiat currency, and perhaps manufactured capital, like factories. But the Pathways book references a brilliant model called the meta-impact framework, which argues that a resilient system actually requires 10 different forms of capital.
10 forms of capital. Most people spend their entire lives obsessing over just one, which is money. What are these other invisible assets?
They are the invisible foundations of true wealth. Health capital, your physical and mental vitality. Human capital, the actual practical skills and knowledge you possess. Social capital, the trust, reciprocity, and relationships within your community. Natural capital, the ecological health of your local water and soil.
It's a holistic balance sheet, because if your Wyoming LLC is full of millions of dollars of fiat currency, but your local water supply is poisoned, your neighbors don't trust you, and you don't have the physical health to enjoy your life, you are not wealthy. You are incredibly vulnerable to a systemic shock.
Precisely. And the literature explores how communities can practically build these alternative forms of capital without relying on fiat currency. They highlight mechanisms like time banks and mutual credit systems.
I was fascinated by the mechanics of a time bank. How does a local economy function without dollars?
In a time bank, the unit of exchange is strictly time and hour of service. And crucially, every hour is valued equally, regardless of the market rate of the specific skill in the fiat economy.
Wait, really? So my hour of doing basic yard work is valued exactly the same as an hour of a professional accountant doing my taxes?
Yes, because the goal is to build social capital and activate dormant resources, not to replicate capitalist hierarchies. It allows people who might be cash poor but time rich, like retirees or young students, to actively participate in the local economy. They provide a service, earn a time credit on a decentralized ledger, and spend that credit when they need something from someone else in the network. It facilitates complex economic exchange without requiring a single dollar from a centralized bank to be involved.
It basically creates a parallel economy. And the book takes this a step further with a concept called cosmolocalism. This is where Web3 and modern technology intersect with local resilience. The mantra of cosmolocalism is design global, manufacture local.
It is a brilliant synthesis. You utilize global, decentralized digital networks, the internet, open source repositories, blockchain technology to share knowledge, architectural designs, and innovations across the world instantly. But the actual physical production of the goods happens locally, utilizing distributed manufacturing hubs like 3D printing farms, CNC machines, and local raw materials.
It combines the absolute best of global intellectual collaboration with the physical resilience of local self-reliance. If a war breaks out on the other side of the planet and disrupts global shipping lanes, a cosmo-local community barely feels the impact because their critical physical production and knowledge sharing are already decentralized. They aren't waiting for a cargo ship. They are printing what they need locally.
It is anticipatory design in its purest form. You are building the lifeboats and learning how to sail them long before the main ship ever hits the iceberg.
Now, this all sounds like incredible utopian theory, but I want to ground this in historical reality because this isn't just an abstract idea. It has been done, and the results were staggering. Let's look at our specific case study for this deep dive, the Wurgel economic miracle. Take us back to Austria in the early 1930s.
It is one of the most compelling and suppressed economic stories in the 20th century. It's 1932. The Great Depression has ravaged Europe. The town of Wurgel, Austria, is facing devastating unemployment. The national fiat currency is incredibly scarce. Because people are terrified of the economic collapse, they are hoarding whatever money they can get their hands on. When everyone hoards money, the velocity of money drops to zero and the local economy completely stalls. People are starving.
So the local mayor decides to implement a radical monetary theory proposed by a prominent economist. He realizes the problem isn't that there's no work to be done, it's that the medium of exchange is broken. So the town issues its own local currency, a form of scrip.
But it wasn't just a replacement for the national currency. It featured a specific radical mechanic called demurrage.
Demurrage. Let's unpack the mechanics of this because it completely flips our modern understanding of money on its head. Demurrage is effectively a negative interest rate, meaning the money actually loses value over time if you just hold on to it in your pocket.
Yes, to keep a Wurgel banknote valid and accepted by local merchants, the holder of the note had to go to the local office at the end of every month, buy a small stamp for 1% of the note's face value, and physically stick it onto the back of the bill. If the bill didn't have the current month stamp, it was worthless.
So if I hold on to this money, it physically costs me a 1% tax every single month. I am being actively penalized for hoarding capital. We are taught our whole lives to save, to hoard, to accumulate, but this mechanic forced the exact opposite behavior.
Because nobody wanted to be holding the banknote when the end of the month arrived and the scam fee was due, they spent it as fast as humanly possible. The moment someone was paid in Virgil script, they immediately turned around and paid their local taxes early. They hired their neighbors to fix their roofs, they bought local goods. The demurrage stamp acted as an artificial inflation mechanism that spurred massive velocity.
The sources note that this local script circulated 12 to 14 times faster than the Austrian national currency. One local bill was changing hands constantly, facilitating a dozen different economic transactions in the time a national bill sat idle in a bank vault. What was the macroeconomic impact on the town?
It was nothing short of miraculous. In a single year, while the rest of Europe was spiraling deeper into the abyss of the Depression, the town of Virgil dropped its unemployment rate by an astonishing 25%. Investments in public works skyrocketed by over 200%. The town built a bridge, paved roads, expanded their forestry operations, and fed their people.
And they did it all simply by redesigning the rules of the money. They changed the code.
They understood that money is not a natural law of physics. It is a social technology. It is a human invention. And because it is an invention, we can design it to serve the specific needs of the community, to circulate rapidly and create local value, rather than allowing it to be hoarded in centralized vaults that extract wealth from the town.
Of course, the story has a dark ending, which highlights the fragility of centralized systems. The Virgil experiment was so incredibly successful that over 200 other Austrian towns prepared to copy the model. And what did the Central Bank of Austria do?
The central bank panicked. They saw a decentralized, highly effective local currency as a direct threat to their monopoly on the creation of money. So they stepped in and legally outlawed the Virgil script. They forced the town back onto the national currency, and Virgil immediately plunged back into the depths of the Depression.
The systemic vulnerability of a centralized authority crushing local resilience. And the Pathways book argues that we need to learn from Virgil, but we need to apply this exact kind of anticipatory systemic thinking using modern tools like Web3, decentralized ledgers, and smart contracts so that a central bank cannot simply shut it down with a stroke of a pen.
We have the technological capacity today to build invisible, resilient economic systems that are immune to centralized interference.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. I mean, we started with the psychological warfare of the whisper wealth movement at Southampton galas. We dove into the deep legal mechanics of K1 phantom income, charging orders, and Wyoming LLC fortresses. And we explored the regenerative, anticipatory economics of demurrage stamps in 1930s Austria.
If we synthesize all of this into a single cohesive worldview, the through line is resilience through decentralization. Whether you are dealing with social dynamics, legal threats, or macroeconomic collapse, the ultimate goal in 2026 is to decouple your personal well-being and your assets from fragile, highly visible, centralized systems.
And this brings us to the core mission of Wealthnetic. We don't just want to talk about theory, we want to bring this back to actionable, pragmatic steps you can take in your own life today. How do you apply the principles of the era of invisibility? Based on our deep dive into these sources, we have 3 key actionable takeaways for you to implement.
Action step number 1. Adopt the inverse logo rule.
I want you to look critically at your spending habits. Are you purchasing items primarily to prove to strangers that you have capital? Stop wearing your wealth. Redirect the funds you would normally spend on flashy, rapidly depreciating assets like a massively branded luxury car or the latest seasonal designer bag, and invest that capital into invisible status.
Like optimizing your health and time.
Exactly. The new ultimate luxury, as the research clearly pointed out, is the optimization of your health capital and your time. Invest in a comprehensive preventative executive health protocol. Or simply utilize your capital to buy yourself total schedule flexibility. True power is having the freedom to exist in the world without needing to prove your net worth to anyone passing by.
Action step number 2. Audit your public breadcrumbs.
I want you to literally run a contingency lawyer search on yourself. Google your name, go to your local county tax assessor's website, and type in your address. What pops up? Are your real estate properties, your businesses, or your brokerage accounts easily tied to your personal name and home address? If they are, you are operating with a massive target on your back.
You need to build that separation.
Take action to separate your identity from your assets. Work with a qualified professional to establish a generic personal residence trust for your home. Utilize anonymous Wyoming holding companies for your investments. Use EINs for your bank accounts. Protect your privacy, and you protect your peace of mind. Your goal is to make the public record of your life incredibly boring.
And action step number 3. Invest heavily in your circular network.
True. Durable resilience does not come from hoarding fiat currency in a single bank account. It comes from diversifying across all 10 forms of capital in the meta-impact framework. How are you building your social and human capital today? Engage in local skill sharing. Look into time banks in your community or be the trim tab that starts one.
Build those relationships.
Build deep, trust-based relationships with your neighbors. Prepare for macroeconomic shocks by ensuring that your personal survival isn't entirely dependent on a fragile global supply chain or a central bank's interest rate decision. Build your lifeboat now.
Those are powerful, pragmatic directives. The reality we face in 2026 is that the very systems we used to rely on for security, public visibility, centralized banking, recognizable status symbols, are the exact things making us profoundly vulnerable.
To quickly recap the journey we've taken together, true wealth in 2026 whispers. It never shouts. It protects itself through legally compliant, impenetrable privacy architectures. It expresses itself through timeless quality, deep knowledge, and quiet access. And it sustains itself by anticipating failure and building resilient, interconnected local communities.
It is a complete paradigm shift. We are leaving the noisy, consumption-driven decades behind and entering an era where discretion is the ultimate currency.
It really is. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. Something to challenge you as you continue your own wealth journey. If the global financial system experienced a massive, prolonged, catastrophic outage tomorrow morning and your fiat bank accounts were completely frozen, what invisible assets, your physical vitality, your practical human skills, your deep community trust would you rely on to rebuild your life?
That is the ultimate, undeniable test of true wealth.
It absolutely is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. If this conversation sparked a new way of thinking for you, or if you found value in these strategies, we warmly invite you to subscribe to the Wealthnetic channel. Share this deep dive with a friend who is serious about building their own sustainable, resilient wealth journey. And please, explore the original source materials we discussed today, dive into the legal texts, read Pathways to Regeneration to master your own financial and social stealth.
Keep thinking systemically and keep building intelligently.
Because remember, when you step into the muddy, unpredictable waters of the modern economy, the best way to survive isn't to build a bigger target on your back, it's to learn how to navigate the invisible currents. Stay stealthy, everyone!